This program, we have with us as a thinker in residence in a program we call the Osher Fellowship, Dr. Melissa K. Nelson, who is an Indigenous scholar and founder of the Cultural Conservancy, who does a lot of thinking about Indigenous traditions, wisdoms, and in this contemporary age, how they might contrast with these other technological advances. So Melissa Nelson has been with us in fellowship for the last couple of weeks, and we're nearing the end of her term. She's brought such enrichment to our staff and our visitors alike, and we're really pleased to have this be a program that's ending her time with us. But in conversations with what we wanted to do for this program, she thought of bringing a panel of other Indigenous thinkers, thought leaders, and scholars to grapple with this question and provide more context and stories of deeper sources of wisdom and thinking around how we could consider intelligence.
Bujun and Dinoy Maganatug, Tanshikia, and Opon Tuish. I greeted you in the languages of my Anishinaabe and Cree ancestors, and also in the language of the Ohlone and Miwok peoples. And before we can speak on the stage, we want to ask permission from the original caretakers of this land, the Ramaytush Ohlone. We are so honored as Indigenous peoples to be on this Ramaytush Ohlone land and to be with the descendant of the first peoples of San Francisco. And we're just delighted to have you here, Greg. And if you don't mind, I'm going to put you on the spot. If you can just welcome us, you can just say a few words in your language. We would be so grateful. And we're asking for permission. We're going to be sharing some knowledge here. So please.
This was all planned, obviously, because he brought the mic to me, so I couldn't even do anything. Hi, Spanika, and thank you, Melissa, dear friend and honored guests, and the other guests here. Thank you for being here and sharing your wisdom. It is something that Indigenous people have been working on for a long time, but in silence and in the shadows. But now it looks like the world is ready for us because they're desperate for answers. So you're more than welcome to speak your wisdom here, and I thank you very much. Hershatuhi, greetings to you, and thank you for being here.
Miigwech, thank you so much. Really, really happy to have you here with us. And I have this extraordinary panel with me. I want to thank Dr. Isabel Hawkins and Melissa Cuevas and all the wonderful staff at Exploratorium for welcoming me here. And when they asked me to do this panel, I was like, I don't think I can do it. I really have too many mixed feelings about AI. I really don't know what I would ever even say about it unless I could talk about it in the context of real AI, ancestral intelligence, and Aboriginal intelligence, and animal intelligence. And let's dive deeper into what intelligence really, really means. And so these are three of the greatest minds and hearts I know working in science, education, stewardship, law, governance, language, and I thought we would have a juicy conversation. So are you ready? Yeah. And to start us off, my wonderful Hawaiian brother, Kanaka Uivi Kanaka, Kaimana Barcarse, is director of Aina-based education with Kamehameha Schools in Hawaii. He is a traditional navigator, a DJ. He's served on the Hawaiian Education Board. He served on the Cultural Conservancy's board and on cultural survival, and a dear friend. And he will open us up with some traditional ancestral knowledge and ways. So thank you, my friend. The floor is yours.
Ai, aloha nui mai kako o waho ike o Kaimana o nā lani. He kama hoi no ka muko o ke awe e ino na e aina iwi o ku upo e kupuna ma ka mokupuni o Hawaii. My name is Kaimana Barcarse, and I'm humbled and to be here on this sacred land of our ohana, our whānau, or our what's that English word? Family. Of our Ohlone family. I was raised by the island of Hawaii, but the bones of my ancestors come from the island of Kauai. And it's really nice to be here. And I was asked to open up by sharing a little bit of the moon phase that we're in. And this, as many of us know, is the new moon. But in our traditions in Hawaii, this is the last moon of the third week of our traditional months. In Hawaii, our mahina are made of 30 days. We have 3 weeks, 3 10-day weeks. So, we have long weekends too. And each week is called an anahulu. The first week is ho'onui. It's when it goes from just a sliver from the moon phase hilo, which is a crescent, and it still has points until it loses its points and it becomes poi poi. And for the next 10 days, including the 4 full moons, that is the week of poi poi. And then the last week of 10 days, the anahulu, is ho'emi, where again, the moon starts to shrink and regain its horns. And the last night, and we are in the month of Hinaya Ele Ele. So this is a great night. This is a great night for fishing. This is a great night for planting many of our trees, our medicines, our sugarcane, our ko, which is super important because ko, not only is that our sugarcane, ko also means to succeed at what you've intended to do. So we hope that we can ho'oko, that we can ko the intentions of this panel this evening. And then tomorrow we'll wake up and we'll be in the month of Mahoi Mua, the first of our 2 twin months. Now, as we start off talking about ancestral knowledge, one of the things that is really important to us as natives is that transference of knowledge from one generation to the next generation. It's something that defines who we are and what we do. And it's not always just that transference of knowledge from the same peoples, but also that sharing of knowledge from others. And there is someone in this room here that holds a special place in a lot of our hearts here, and especially in mine. She sometimes refer to her as our Yucatec Maya grandmother. And she has inspired us. I've been able to be with her in my homelands, but also in her homelands, in the Yucatan Peninsula, in Merida, in Mexico, and learn from a lot of their traditions and remind me of the responsibility, the kuleana that we have to carry that on. And so in honor of all that she'd share, I'd like to share a little gift with you, Tutu Maria. So one of the beautiful things is that I don't speak Spanish, and Doña Maria doesn't speak English. I don't speak Yucatec Maya, and she doesn't speak Hawaiian. But we speak to each other. We've known her. Gracias. Yeah, Emashnipola. Oye, mahalo anui loa ia oi. Yet, through continents, through decades, she's been able to share so much with all of us. And it's that intentionality that she shared in all of her work. It's that purity of thought and of mind that we all grew from. This blanket was designed by a dear family friend of ours, and it's named Kipola. Kipola means to wrap and embrace, and we hope that it will wrap and embrace Tutu Maria and keep her warm and strong. But this pattern was designed after flowers that were wrapped with newspapers. In 1896, our queen, Liliuokalani, was imprisoned by the United States Marines as Hawaii was taken over. She was imprisoned and sequestered, but her attendants brought her fresh flowers every day, wrapped those flowers in newspapers. Yeah, we had newspapers back then. We were pretty advanced. And we'll talk about that knowledge in a little bit. But it wrapped those flowers in newspapers and brought it to our queen. And that's how our queen got her news every day and was able to understand what was going on outside. And then in turn, when the flowers has met its time, she would send it back out with notes tucked in there. And so it's that type of application of knowledge that we honor here this evening, and that we honor you, Doña Maria, and thank you for all that you shared with us. Aloha.
Oh, thank you so much, Kaimana, and thank you, Doña Maria, for all your wisdom that you share so generously with so many around the world. Miigwech, muchas gracias. And we thought it was really important to start by modeling ancestral intelligence, gift giving, honoring our elders, the power of the voice and song. How can you scrape that and reduce that to something on a screen? We feel that that's not really possible, and that we're here to defend ancestral indigenous knowledge against the exploitation and to protect it from being used in really very harmful ways. So when we were talking and conversing about how can we contrast ancestral and artificial intelligence, my wonderful colleagues here were saying, is it really intelligence what our AI is? Is it really intelligence? What is it, right? We know we have forms of intelligence. We model it after the intelligence of the earth, after our animal relatives, our plant relatives. But what is it really? So I'm going to pose to my wonderful colleagues here, Dan and Rebecca, give you a little pause, but you join in too, Kaimana. How do you define intelligence, and how would you contrast the ideas of ancestral intelligence that you've learned from your ancestors and your elders compared to what we know of today as AI, artificial intelligence?
Mo danzi mamui kutsani mat inyavai mata shimui zipaipa was a hot na you pipaz taitan yavi itiv hota yavi koav koe kurim spe tanta. My name is Daniel Golding. I'm Kutsan from Fort Yuma. I'm from the Roadrunner clan. And it's great to see so many people here gathered to listen and to learn and to hopefully make us all stronger when we get out of this place, from however we share this information. Intelligence, it's kind of a, you think about it, it's not a non-native word, right? It's a non-native definition. And so it's hard to wrap that into a native word or way of thinking. So the only thing I think of, like when you say like intelligence, artificial intelligence, it's like ketsonyom, which means to copy. It's copying things. It's a thing. It doesn't necessarily think. Yuduts, it's copying information that's been given to it, and so which is different. So it's not necessarily thinking, it's only taking information and stuff like that and redoing it, which is very different. So how do you fit that into this puzzle from a Kutsan perspective or, Hawaiian or, your tribe's perspective, whoever? It's because we're all different. We all have different beliefs and different ways of being that it's hard to fit those things into that, which is missing when you not to put down artificial intelligence, but I mean there's for me it's like, well, wait a second, how does this help me and my people if it's only a one perspective or one voice or what's pulling out, because it's very hard, right? So defining intelligence is a hard word. Artificial intelligence, hopefully through this discussion tonight, maybe will come from something. We'll like walk away and think about how this affects us as not just Quetzal people, but other Indigenous people too out there, or even non-Indigenous. How does it help you and your feelings and people and stuff like that? But yeah.
Thank you so much, Dan. And Dan is an incredible filmmaker. Check out his work at Hocon Media. Does beautiful documentary films uplifting Indigenous peoples, their knowledge, cultures, traditions, and protecting our lands. So thank you. And next, Rebecca Tsosie, an extraordinary professor of law at University of Arizona, formerly at ASU. One of the reasons I went to ASU, and Rebecca's an author and really at the forefront of protecting traditional Indigenous knowledge from a legal perspective and working towards knowledge sovereignty. So Rebecca, please share with us a bit about your perspective on this idea of ancestral intelligence and artificial intelligence and the need to really protect Indigenous knowledges.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And I want to thank all of the staff and leadership of the Exploratorium. This is an amazing place. And thanks to each and every one of you who came out this evening. This is the first conversation that I've attended of this magnitude, because what we're talking about is really going to frame our collective future. And it really takes an understanding of really complicated things and the respect that we have as Native people for each other and for our non-Native relatives to be in this room thinking with us is really very powerful. And I thank you. And congratulations to Doña Maria. I really appreciate that you're here. It makes me feel so good. And my people are a transborder people. Yaquis are Arizona and Mexico. And we even have a connection in Yucatan from way, way back when we were sent there. So thank you for being here. So now I'm going to put on my law professor hat. Okay, I was educated at UCLA Law School by lawyers and philosophers. And what was I taught? I was taught that intelligence is a product of logic and reason, and the reasonable person in the law, that's the standard. So I was interested in that. Where did that come from? And in the natural law tradition of Western European people, that was tied to Christianity and the Catholic Church. And Thomas Aquinas said, the person is created in God's image. The person is a creator with their intelligent mind that can understand truth, they can understand what's good, and they can reason about that. And when that worked its way up to the secular philosophers in Europe, like Immanuel Kant, who really framed a lot of Western law, he said, intelligence is a feature, again, of, at the highest level, the evolved civilized mind. And of course, that was what the white man in the US was modeled to be. That was the first sense of who could be a citizen, right? That they were civilized, they could go to school, they could vote, they could do all those things. That came right from Kant's literature. And he put other people's, I was kind of like insulted that Native people were at the bottom of the hierarchy. And I was like, why? Why were they at the bottom? See, I'm so mad my notes are falling, but it's all cited there. But he really said that because they were the closest to nature, they were primitive, and other races were suited for other things. but you had to get to the white race before you got civilization. White women were also, they were intelligent, but they didn't have the capacity for logic and reason, which is why in this country they couldn't go to law school for a long time, they couldn't be jurors for a long time, they couldn't vote, because they didn't have logic and reason. So in today's literature, the philosophical literature, people are talking about epistemic injustice, that who qualifies as a knower, what is knowledge, who has credibility to testify. We might think that's neutral, but for Native people, we know it's not. You know how you decide if a site is sacred? Well, they tried this in Arizona with the telescope on Mount Graham. Was it the Apache people that were affiliated? No. They wanted the Pope at that time to weigh in about whether or not it was possible to have a sacred site. And in fact, was that a sacred site? That was in 1993. So these are the issues that we're dealing with. So that concept of intelligence in Western European is the rational mind. For Native people, that concept of intelligence, as you have talked about beautifully and will talk about, it is a form of consciousness that sees the universe as animate, as alive. Everything, when you talked about the moon cycles, everything is working. The ocean is working. And we are part of that. It is part of us. And that's what it means to be indigenous to a place, that you are part of that place. Even if you never saw it. There are places in Mexico that I have learned about. I was born here, grew up here. There are places I can see in my mind, even though I was never at that place, because it is alive in the memory of the people. That consciousness, which the late Vine Deloria Jr., who wrote a wonderful book called God is Red, you should get a copy of that, but he wrote about it as a different metaphysics. And that is what we are talking about. Consciousness is absent from artificial intelligence. What artificial intelligence really is, it is training a machine to have the mind like a human, to take a bunch of information, put it into parcels, and use it to write your term paper, to write your grocery list. Those types of behaviors, to behave like a human. It doesn't have emotions. It doesn't have volition. It is not alive. The machine is as good or bad as its creator.
Yeah, lay it down, Rebecca. Thank you. Awesome. All right, thank you. And Kaimana, please.
So when you ask that question over lunch, really what is intelligence? Look back at, into our language. And two words that most closely fit the idea of intelligence is ike, or knowledge, and na'awao, which is wisdom. And so when we think about it, anybody can accumulate, can scrape, can amass ike, or knowledge. But it's how you use that knowledge in the wise applications to fit the context and the need of your people at any given time. That is na'awao. That is wisdom. And that is something that cannot be done through this thing that we're calling artificial intelligence. Back in 2005, I remember we were getting ready to go down to Aotearoa for WIPSI, the World Indigenous Peoples Conference on Education. And we needed to learn a dance. And my teacher, when I asked, I said, hey, we got video. It was brand new at the time. We started having digital video. I can shoot video and we can send it around for people to learn. And he looked at me and he said, Kaimana, the video can never be the teacher. The video does not have ha. The video does not have that breath of life. That video does not have the spirit. So I said, okay, I won't. He said, no, shoot the video. Shoot the video, but my charge to you is you learn this dance and you go around and you teach it in person so that ha can be transferred. And then the video becomes a teaching aid. We have a saying, it's a olelo no eaos ho, wise saying, and it's elikime kupuna, e lula ika enehana, a'ale e lula ia. Like our ancestors, let us rule the technology of the day and not be ruled by it. A prime example of our people doing that is, the story that we hear in the popular textbooks is that the missionaries came, they put clothes on the heathens, and they taught us how to read and write. Partially true. They did introduce reading and writing to our people, but it was our chiefs, our kings, our elders that saw the value in reading and writing and in adopting that technology. That reading and writing, that was the Facebook of today, right? They took that. They sent our people around the world to learn. They made sure that each of our people had that opportunity. And at a certain point in our history, we had 95% literacy in the entire Hawaiian nation. There was more literary works of art in our language than there was in Old English at the same time. We had electricity in Iolani Palace and Hulihe'e Palace before there's electricity in the White House. We had the first printing press west of the Rockies in Halepa'i in Lahaina, where we all heard about the devastating Lahaina fires. It was up on that hill. And in a short period of about 40 to 50 years, we had over 100 different newspaper and journal titles. What was left, what survived, what didn't get destroyed from fire, flood, degradation of time, and was committed to microfilm and microfiche, when we put it together, we have 1.5 million pages of 8.5 by 11 standard print knowledge in the language of our ancestors. Why? Because they took the technology of their day as Kanaka, as Uivi, as Hawaiians, and they used that technology to their benefit. They didn't fall to the norms of what reading, writing, or printing should be. They saw the value and they made it theirs. They breathed the ha, that breath, into the work. And so when I think about this artificial intelligence, that thought of intelligence, there's a lot of Ike. We got 1.5 million pages of that. But it was how our ancestors applied that Ike. That application of the knowledge, that is not wow, that is the wisdom. And in my mind, that's kind of what differentiates what we're talking about today. And it's a great opportunity, but it can also be a great detriment if we don't take hold of the wheel and determine our own destiny.
Absolutely. Ho, thank you. And I'm so glad you brought up wisdom, Kaimana, because we have more and more information, we have more and more technology, and we have less and less wisdom, right? And that is really skewed. We're extremely out of balance. As we've had technological ascent, we've had psychological and wisdom descent. And so we're at this really rare place. We're at a crossroads. In my Anishinaabe tradition, we have this seventh fire prophecy. The Hopi, the Navajo, Hawaiian, every tribe has this prophecy about this time being at a crossroads. And what's going to get us out of climate change, the poly crisis, is not more and more technical information. It's not going to be more and more technology. Yes, maybe we can harness it and use some of it for good. Some of it is detecting, biodiversity. It's monitoring changes in the environment. It's helping some school children learn in new ways with different abilities. So there are some really important uses of it. But we are so techno-utopian with this fascination and addiction of going faster and faster and more knowledge and less wisdom. And I think Indigenous peoples, my elders, and many of the communities I work with are very concerned about this, to really get to places of intuition, of insight, of imagination, of creativity. We need to slow down. We need to empty out. Knowledge is more and more and more. Wisdom is less and less and less. We need to empty out to really embrace the mystery and the intelligence of Mother Earth, the intelligence of the universe, which is the fabric of this of this breath of life. What a blessing we are given. And our ceremonies at seasonal cycles, we are there to honor and celebrate that breath of life in a humble way, in the mystery of the intelligence of the universe. And if we stop listening to that, there's grave consequences that we're really feeling right now. My dear sister Isabel and Aparna are astronomers, and they're concerned about all of the space junk surrounding Mother Earth, and that we may no longer be able to see the stars because there's so much pollution now. So what is this technology doing to us fundamentally? Those are some of my concerns. True Indigenous or Aboriginal intelligence knows we must be very humble and very careful. And that's why we have the law of 7 generations. How will our actions today impact our grandchildren's grandchildren, right? How are our actions, our breath today going to affect if our bay is going to be clean or polluted, if we can drink the water out of a river or creek? Those are the kinds of questions I'm interested in, and that kind of intelligence that thinks of the future. The Haudenosaunee people, the great Six Nations, Iroquois, that have been wonderful teachers, they talk about coming together with a clear mind, a good mind. But they often say the problem with Western knowledge is they think the mind is in the head. They think the mind is in the brain. There's a mind right here. There's a mind right here. There's a mind right here. And so for me, ancestral intelligence is listening to the intelligence of the body and the intuition that is much more subtle and than what any artificial intelligence can try to emulate or copy.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just the idea of like how, going back to like how Kutsan can, artificial intelligence, so like it was interesting when I was seeing these videos being created by artificial intelligence on what it thinks Indigenous communities are. Like, you know, I don't know if you've seen these videos that come out sometimes.
So cheesy.
And I was like, wow, you know, where is it pulling this information to make these videos of what Indigenous communities look like? And it's like, it's so not, I mean, it's completely not Quetzal, right? I mean, we all have sort of this stereotypical image of what, you know, Native people are, and that's sort of like that, but like on steroids, you know, in this idea. And it's sad because really, again, as a Quetzal or as an Indigenous person, we're being marginalized, right? The system is not created in a way that will pull us. So when you're talking about, you know, being at the bottom in this pool of information that's part of this, you know, that's out there in this wherever world, everyone thinks it's out there somewhere. This pool of information, we as Quetzals are probably way down here. So when it's pulling information to create something, it's pulling from the top, right, out of that system. So all these other communities are not being represented in a true fashion. And so when my kids see it or some other kids see it, they're saying, well, is this what represents us, or is this how the world sees us? How does this benefit my community, right? You know, and so that's where the big problem is for me. And the reason why just sort of I got it, you know, I'm a filmmaker, right? So I'm not, you know, and I'm involved in my culture and stuff like that. But it became like, you know, I wanted to find out more about this. You know, I mean, how can we merge these things together in a way that will benefit Quetzal people or benefit other tribal people? How do you create a system of artificial intelligence and plus, you know, own it in a way where it's not like being, you know, misused or something in some way? And but right now it seems like that's kind of hard, right? Because there's just no way of knowing where that's at. So, and I think so when you think about those things, that's what I think, right? You know, how does it benefit us, or how does it benefit my community, my kids? Is there a potential to use it, like you said, as a tool, how they use printing and things like that to save languages or do something like that? And without, you know, I don't know, maybe everyone should learn how to speak Quetzal, you know? I don't know, maybe that'd be cool too. So, but anyways, that's you know, just thinking about all that stuff beyond, you know, that.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much. And you know, Native people are not afraid of technology. We're not, as Kaimana mentioned, with Hawaiians and the printing press and so many areas. You know, we love our computers, we love our phones. I mean, the car, the Indian car, the res car. I mean, gosh, you don't want to take a truck away from a Navajo, right? Oh my God, that's them's fighting words. You know, we love machines and really relate to them in many different ways. Daniel Wildcat, a great Native scholar, has just released a new book called Indigenuity. He coined the word indigenous ingenuity, which is always using the best tools available. I remember a Pomo grandmother once at a basket weavers gathering, and she said, just because I use a blender now instead of mortar and pestle doesn't mean I'm any less Pomo. You know, I can still use the old tools, but I love my blender for making, you know, my breaking down my acorns. So I want to check in, especially Kaimana, you know, you really embrace technologies and great photographer and a DJ and works in studios, and you're also a navigator. And so what does Indigenous technology look like to you? What are some examples of innovation, Indigenous technological innovation that you have really been inspired by and that you work with?
Mahalo for that question. You know, there's Indigenous innovation, and there's also Indigenous innovative adaptation. So similar to what you had mentioned about the blender, we have a tutu on the island of Kauai who turned a old Model A truck into a poi making machine. Put it up on cinder blocks. The drive shaft goes to an industrial meat grinder with a big pakini made out of stainless steel so that they could feed the masses. But family always still pounded poi on the poi board in the old style with the boards that were passed down. Because there's knowledge in that, there's power in that, there's story in that, and it tastes a lot better. Now, as far as passing down, traditional knowledge, on that sense, you know, Papa Mo from Satawal in the Carolinian Islands in Micronesia, he was the one that helped us as Kanaka Hawaii and as Pacific Islanders to recapture that ancestral knowledge that it actually wasn't taken away from us. In Hawaii, we stopped voyaging about 600 years ago because we had what we needed to be a robust society. So we stopped. But then there in this guy, Thor Heyerdahl, with this little thing called Kontiki. I always spell it with a C, not a K, because it was basically his theory was that, you know, Polynesians are a descendant of South Americans who drifted on rafts over and populated Polynesia, where our stories tell us that we purposefully navigated and populated the Pacific. He spent about 100 days, ran out of food, almost died. In 1976, when our canoe sailed down, navigated by Papa Mau, who had never been to Tahiti. It's not part of his direct ancestral lineage of sailing back and forth, but he was a master navigator and he understood the surroundings because he said, you know, there's so many great things he said. Like a student asked him, hey, what's the difference between Micronesians and Polynesians? And he said, oh, some guy drew a line. Which really what it was, because the ocean connects us. It does not divide us. The ocean is our highways. So even though he never took that highway before, he was able to utilize the stars, the same stars that for centuries were used by our ancestors and his ancestors to understand where we are in the world and how to get back home. He used that ancestral knowledge and passed that ancestral knowledge down to many of us so that we could recapture and revitalize the traditions that we ourselves gave up. So those are some of the technologies that, it seems pretty, it seems pretty amazing when you think about it today. Everybody's using GPS, and we call it KPS, Kanaka Positioning System. But it was this technology that was passed on from time to time. Another really quick technology that we had is I live on the island of Hawaii in an area called Kona. How many of you guys drink Kona coffee? Yeah, you know, these really smart Western farmers discovered the Kona coffee belt. When Captain Cook arrived, he documented in his ship's log, they documented this huge swath on the dry side of the island that shouldn't be there of major green forest, food forest areas that fed the people. That was intentional. On that side, the dry side, leeward side of the island, we don't get the nourishing rains from the trade winds that come from these lands, come from the northeast and go down to Hawaii. It's dry, but the technology of our ancestors kept the high areas barren so that it really encouraged a convection system. It heated up the land up in the uplands, and so every day it would enhance the winds that come off of the ocean, the wet winds, and every afternoon about 1 o'clock or so, you see the clouds start to stack. And then when the land cooled off, the rain would fall. And so you can thank our ancestors for the Kona coffee that you drink and enjoy so much. But those are just a couple of examples of the technology that's been passed down. And it's not just ike, it's not just knowledge, it's how it was applied and how it continues to be applied that really makes the difference.
Thank you so much for those beautiful examples, Kaimana. And Rebecca, I'd love to hear from you a bit more. We're so lucky to have you here, someone who really knows and has looked at the protection of Indigenous knowledge, with biopiracy and genetic engineering and, now artificial intelligence, and looking at the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And, what is this concept of knowledge sovereignty, and why is it so fundamental and important for Indigenous peoples in this conversation about AI?
Thank you. That is such a great question, and it's also like a deep question that has a lot of.
There's many layers.
So let me just respond respectfully in just a couple of ways, drawing on Kaimana's examples, which are fantastic, because Indigenous knowledge as a traditional knowledge is really unique to each people. So there are many Indigenous knowledge systems, but what they have in common is that they are very ancient, but they've lasted up until the present day because that knowledge is kept. And that's why that whole idea of who's a knowledge keeper is really important for Indigenous people, and who has the authority to share it, how should it be shared. Those are carefully regulated by Indigenous people under their own traditional customary law. And the practices, like you were talking about, are part of the knowledge. And that could be agriculture. It could be the knowledge of the environment, when you fish, when you don't fish, how you fish. Like it's associated with all of these fields of knowledge that the people need to survive generation to generation. So that's why it's so complicated to explain to people, but it's living, right? It's living, and it's regulated, and it's shared in appropriate ways so that the generations that come after, like your kids, that they can be like you, and that's what it's all about. So the idea of splitting the knowledge from the practices and selling this and commodifying that, and the seed is worth this, and the seed should be banked there, and the knowledge of the seed, whatever, like that makes no sense at all in this world. And that's what I've been working on for many years. But the comparison, the Western European model, is what we are stuck with in the US and globally. And they say if it's a material item, like your shells, that belongs to you. But the knowledge about the shells, if they can find it somewhere, if they can look at your design and try to replicate it, there's nothing wrong with that, because knowledge is free. And that's that free access dynamic of Western Europe. They want to innovate. They want to take this and take that and splice them together. And that's why there are genetically modified organisms which aren't in nature, and they're not even cultivated through generations like native heirloom seeds. They're spliced together out of different organisms. are they really a food? I think the U.S. calls them a food product or something like that. They're not an honest to gosh food.
Frankenfood.
They're a Frankenfood. They're a Frankenfood. Okay, but turns out the inventors of the Frankenfoods, they can get a patent, they can make a lot of money, and they're bioengineered to die at the end of the season, the seeds. So they're bioengineered to die. A food that sustains life is bioengineered to die. That whole ethic is wrong. And it's kind of like a desecration. But morality doesn't fit into U.S. patent law. It does fit into Europe, and they've had some qualms. Even Canada had some qualms, like the Onco mouse, the poor mouse manufacturing, like that wasn't going to be patented in Canada, but not in the U.S. You can patent all of that in the U.S. So these are the struggles that we have. And you asked about sovereignty. Sovereignty in the international sense is now termed indigenous self-determination. It doesn't matter if a nation state recognizes the tribe or not. Every indigenous people is a people. They have a right to self-determination under their own laws and customs. And that is what is so distinctive. It's recognized in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People that they are related to place over time and traditions as a spiritual relationship. You'll never find that language in any other document of human rights law. Spiritual rights. That is the right that Indigenous people have to have this intergenerational relationship. In the United States, we do have 574 federally recognized Indian tribes that exercise sovereignty under their own laws on reservation lands that are held in trust, and they do operate as governments. So they can enact laws for regulation of food, and those are sovereign laws. But even if you are not in that category, Indigenous peoples here have the right to self-determination. And Mr. Costero, thank you for being part of this. Thank you for welcoming us onto your land. Thank you for being visible in a space that needs you and needs your voice. That is self-determination. Cultural and political sovereignty are the right of self-determination. And that is what we're sustaining with this work. And I could go on, but I won't, because I'm a law professor, and this could go on for a few hours, but take my class.
Thank you, Rebecca.
I was just going to say something
Please.
about, you talked about knowledge and this idea of knowledge and, these ideas and who owns that knowledge, right? And I think that's kind of like one of the biggest fears when you talk about artificial intelligence or things like that is like the fear of sharing that information out in a system and people using it and for financial gain or whatever. And then that's the fear of this knowledge getting out there. I know as Native people, we kind of hold that stuff close to us, even being in an environment like this, we're already sort of like I am, it's like, well, how much do I share, because it's just sort of ingrained in us that they're going to steal it, and so when you talk about that knowledge, I think that's kind of it, But the beautiful thing too about passing down knowledge, sort of in an indigenous way, which artificial intelligence cannot do, is what's happening here, right? This act of us, not just us talking to you, but interaction, right? Interaction and feedback in a way that, maybe you learn something from us, but we'll learn something from you too, in a very unique way that cannot be experienced by using a computer or artificial intelligence and stuff like that. And I think that's, when you talk about, the canoeing and the experience and all that stuff, it's beautiful probably on the computer watching it, but in person, right? There's just so much there, emotion, feeling, connections, that senses, that would never be created again in a computer setting. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to get at in some ways, right? Is that those little nuances are just missing from that. And there's, so a lot of times, even in my community, I don't think we really think about that. We're just like, so, wow, this is great, you know. But I think that sometimes you kind of have to, the old way would be, you know, you'd get the elders together and they would sit under the ramada, and they would talk about it, right? They would talk and they would discuss and they would talk about these things, you know. But that's kind of been gone as well. But I think when you talk about the knowledge and sharing knowledge and those kind of things, how much information you share, how is that information going to be used, who's going to use it, I think that's kind of like, you know, when you talk about artificial intelligence and stuff like that, that's missing in my perspective, right?
Thank you so much, Dan. Yeah, we often talk about who's going to benefit from AI, but who's suffering because of AI? The water that's used, the electricity that's used, the labor that's used, right? We need to really look at both of that, two parts of that equation. And we were really lucky to get a tour this morning of the great AI exhibit here in the Exploratorium. If you haven't checked it out yet, it's fabulous. And they really ask some provocative questions. And that's one of them. Who is benefiting and who is suffering by these technologies? And another question they ask, and they have, you know, mainly school children here, what are your dreams and hopes for AI? And what are your deepest concerns and fears about it? And we had a chance to really look at some of those. It was fascinating. You know, and these were, you could tell, first and second graders, sometimes sixth graders, you could tell a few high schoolers. And there's a lot of concern. There is profound concern. So I know we're running low on time, and I want to open it up for questions soon from all of you, but I want to hear from my esteemed panelists here. What are some of your hopes and dreams for how to use AI in a really regenerative, productive way for the betterment of all of humanity, not just the 1%, and for the biodiversity of the earth? And what are some of your fears or concerns or really worries about it, how we need to protect our knowledge? So anyone who would like to share on that, and we'll close with that question, and then we'll open it up to all of you for some of your questions.
Okay, to recap that, what was some of our hopes and then some of our worries?
Yes.
For me, the hope is not relative to AI itself. The hope is relative to our perspectives of what AI is, what AI can be, and how to use it in a pono, in a righteous way, in a way that will be beneficial, will be non-extractive, and it'll be a tool. And that leads me to my biggest worry, my biggest fear. It's just a tool. We are still the mechanic that is turning that wrench. If we allow AI to take that from us, we start to lose our muscle memory. We start to lose our understanding. We turn into theory, no practice. You know, first time I stepped on the deck of a voyaging canoe and went sailing, every single thing that I thought I had learned was out the door. When you get broadsided by that first wave, when you taste that salt air in your face, when you realize that we're going to be sailing for a couple weeks straight, it's not an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 kind of thing. You know, it's that practice. But as you're doing that practice, you get that understanding, you get that skills. It starts to become second nature. We talk about the different voyages a lot. It's now in practically every university system in Hawaii, a voyaging or a navigation class, teaching the theory of celestial navigation, teaching the ideals of voyaging, teaching working together and all of that fun stuff. But how many people actually get on the deck of the canoe to really understand what it is, what it means, what it feels like? So I think that's my worry, is that we become so reliant. It's really obsoleting ourselves from the picture, from the equation. And so that's my worry. So let us use that tool. Let us, mako'olelo ko makopo I kupuna, like me ka iolelo ai mamua. E lula I ka enehana, a'ale e lula ia. So let's listen to our ancestors and our elders and what they say. Let us rule the technologies of our day, but not be ruled by them.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Rebecca or Dan?
I'll just quickly offer, in connection with that thought, my biggest worry, and I'll go here first, or my biggest concern was that it was going to be another form of colonialism, because it really is taking all these cultural symbols and putting them all together. And you can actually ask it to prepare some document about some Indigenous people, and it will do that. And it is scary to read what that is. And that was my biggest fear, that this data process was not going to be regulated. And it is in the hands of private companies for the most part. And the interest in making money is strong, and people are there, they want the product. So there really isn't anything holding that back. But the promise, I think, the upside to me, and especially with the students I work with, they do love the digital world. They love to learn that way. They love the symbols. And a lot of my students don't have access to grandparents, sadly, that can teach them language, that can show them different things, and they are hungry for it. And I was really inspired. I saw a video of Dr. Deepak Chopra, who's created his own AI that deals with his form of medicine, which is loosely built on Ayurveda, right? I mean, it's a vast tradition, but also his modern knowledge. And he says, if you curate the knowledge and you ask it the right questions, it will transform human understanding of health. And that's what he has done. So from a Native perspective, if those tools are under Native Indigenous control and we can use it in that way, then I would be very happy and think it would be productive.
Excellent. Thank you for that hopeful message. Dan, would you like to share some of yours?
Well, I think there are potentially some good things about AI when it comes to certain things, maybe medicine or, things like that in the medical field and things, maybe, I don't know. But so there's some of that, but I also think, like I was just looking at my slides up here and I was just thinking like, the gold mines and the destructions and the things that's happening because of, the amount of energy that this stuff is creating to build these, data centers which store this information and like all this, everyone thinks like it's just out there in the cloud somewhere, floating around. It's not. These big data banks that are around the country that use up all this energy, and where's all that going to come from, and where's all this stuff being stored? So, and usually it's in, probably down where I'm from in the desert or somewhere else, So there's a big fear around all that stuff, when you think about artificial intelligence beyond this stuff. But I do think there's potentially some good stuff in the idea of around language stuff, But as long as we're in control of that, the specific tribes can be in that control without it being sort of, leaked out, I think is the big question. So.
Thank you. And I asked this question recently of a really dear, revered teacher of many of us, Leroy Little Bear, Blackfoot elder and author of the Buffalo Treaty that's been protecting and restoring buffalo to the northern plains, and a law professor and a native scientist. His work is documented in a great book called Blackfoot Physics. And he was curious about AI. He loves quantum physics. He's really has a scientific mind, and he loves Western science, and he thinks it just kind of affirms or is parallel to a lot of his Blackfoot physics knowledge. And so we were asking him about AI, and he was like, yeah, I wanted to look into it. I thought it could be another good tool for us, maybe useful in helping our nation, our communities. And he looked into it and he said, nah. He said, it's no good for us. He said, there's no data on Blackfoot knowledge. He was like, they haven't really stolen enough of our knowledge yet to really make it useful or have any, relevance to us. So it's primitive. He called AI primitive, right? It's really not there. But then he heard about, I love media, I love photography, filmmaking, I love Dan's work, Mateo Hinojosa in the audience, other great media makers. And, I think there's some really exciting things for, capturing audio and sound under the ocean, like here, Exploratorium works with the Monterey Bay Aquarium to really listen to and take pictures of things down in the Monterey Bay Canyon. Our astronomer friends that can take pictures up of the stars and all the nebula and galaxies. So I'm kind of excited about some of the applications in that way. And so Leroy heard about some of our colleagues at Arizona State University who do surround sound and do all these interesting things with small kind of robots that use AI to audio record and analyze sound. And he was excited about giving people an immersive experience virtually of being in the middle of a buffalo herd and hearing their grunts and their humming and the sound of their hooves and like just being in it, because for us, the buffalo is medicine. So I think there is some hope if we are in the driver's seat. We have to make sure we are in the driver's seat. Yeah. Isabel, you have some questions for us. Excellent. From the audience. We want to hear. Okay, go for it.
One for you, Melissa. The second card. Kaimana, for Dan.
Oh.
And then there's more here.
Okay, excellent. Let's see. All right. Thank you. And thank you for those who came and are leaving. We're really happy you are here. Enjoy the rest of your after dark. And those who are staying, we're going to respond now. Who'd like to start? Kaimana, can you see that, your question? You want to start or? Yeah.
Yeah, it's okay. So let me read the question. With all of the indigenous knowledge that has been proven to work time and time again, why is this wisdom often put to the sidelines? Does it stem purely from racism, bigotry, or are there other facets at play? My mind goes to Lahaina before the fires, and the warning that Kanakuivi gave of what diverted more in the back, what diverted the water to the farmer, the Venice of the Pacific. So just a little bit of backstory with this. And the Lahaina was often referred to as the Venice of the Pacific. The Lahaina fires, in the past, all that area that burnt was very, very green and rich and lush. It was during the time of the sugar plantations that some of the big plantation owners were able to get rights to the water and divert the water to that land to feed the plantations. But after the plantations went away, a lot of land was sold or reverted back to the original owners, but didn't have the access to the water. And that's really what kept the land so barren and so dry, because the traditional flow of water was not there. And so that kind of gives a little bit of backstory to that. In my mind, yeah, sometimes there's a little bit of maybe racism, bigotry, elitism. But bottom line, I really think it's about resources. It's about people wanting more and more, and not really caring at whose expense that this comes all from. We have a thought of lava kupono. What is enough? What is just right for us? What sustains us? And then we can leave more for others to have, for those that come after us to have as well. And it's not just in the traditional sense of things like water, of fish in the ocean, of our plants in the forest. But when you put it to modern terms, what is lava kupono? Do I need the latest iPhone, the latest iPad, the latest tech? By sacrificing that, getting the latest tech, or getting the latest green car, what happened to my old car? Did we decommission it so that it's no longer contributing to or did we trade it in and now it's somebody else's problem that's contributing to, we're doing a little better, but somebody's doing even worse, right? But what is that lava kupono? What is that amount that is enough for us to sustain and to be happy, but also to not detract from the beauty of everything that surrounds us? That we're not working overtime to get the latest tech, but instead we're spending that time with that tech at home, in the land, in the ocean, with our families, with the things that really matter to us? Is it really about accumulating? That seems to be the common trend. But if we declutter, if we look at what's really meaningful to us, what really sustains us as individuals, as families, as people, and then we look at lava kupono, what's enough for us? And we can share with others. And I think that's the crux of that question, is that whoever that we're referring to did not have that concept of lava kupono. They had the concept of, I want more. Mahalo.
It's funny because, like in our language, we have a saying, "Mayahatz," which means don't make a pig of yourself. It's like, moderation. This idea of like you don't eat it all, you don't take it all, right? You leave some for somebody else too, and that's sort of like a basic. So they say, "Mayahatz," don't make a pig of yourself.
How's your question, Rebecca? You want to?
So I have
Check
a
it
really
out.
great question.
Okay.
It says, do you ever worry that AI has taken over?
Woo woo.
And I think that's a great question. And I do worry. I had not realized until I started doing this research that AI actually started in the 1950s. And it was pretty innocuous. I mean, we wouldn't even have known. I didn't know. But where it really took off was with social media and with the apps and all the ways that they have to collect data from you when you play video games and when you interact with the apps on your phone and you're this. All of that goes into these machines and they recognize patterns. And then they know how to pitch things to the consumer, how to up your desire for the things. Ooh, they get you going. So they manipulate the consumer. That's on the bad side. They also make decisions about you that you don't even know about because your data is an algorithm and that's what's making the decision. And that could affect a lot of things about your life. I hadn't realized when they went to the airport. This is how out of it I am. I travel all the time, but then it's like, look in the machine. I was like, what? And then I asked somebody about that. Oh, they're doing facial recognition on all these airports, and different countries have different ways of using that and mapping it. And one of them is to determine what group or groups you belong to. And I just think things like that. So the privacy, the surveillance, the use of that you don't know about, you don't consent to as an attorney, I feel that those are not appropriate, that we need to have a control. And that is true of every person in this room, to have human dignity and respect for you. You're not just your data to be used and appropriated. And so that is my fear, that we don't know enough about those technologies. And they are protected by intellectual property law. So you can learn some things, but other things you will never know. So good question.
Yes, the attention economy, where we put our attention is what we are the product, what they're paying attention to and what the algorithms are based on. That's frightening. That's very scary to me. I did not consent to that. You did not consent to that. And yet we've been experimented on now for quite some time with it. And now it is taking over, it appears. Yeah. Dan, do you want to check out your question there or have a final thought?
How can we, on a personal level, contribute to give credit to ancestral and to intellectual property? Jeez. Wow. Can it be an easy one like that, where I could just get angry?
Just an easy one. Yeah, in 5 minutes, 3 minutes.
Where can its application help on a larger scale? I guess we can write a book about this, right? No, that's a great question. And I think a lot of times, personally, when you talk about those kind of things, you honor them in your own way, right? Like, it could be a very simple thing because it's a personal thing between you and that moment. And so part of that is maybe you sing a song, a special song that or maybe they come in your memory, and so you honor them by honoring them at that moment, and things like that. When you think about ancestral intellectual properties, so it's a momentary thing that happens. As Quetzans, we don't pray. We don't say prayer in the way that most people do it. You speak for something, or or as my uncle would say, our action is our prayer. So however you do that, but that would be it. But I think we can all embrace, in a global sense, a little bit of that, right? Where we can just take a moment to appreciate something that was given to us, whether it's intellectual or something else in the memory, so we can all, because sometimes I think we forget about all that stuff, right? And then sometimes it's those very personal, simple moments that we have to re-embrace. And I think this is one way you can do it, between you and the creator, whoever. But yeah.
Thank you. Wow, these are some great questions, and I know we're going to close here soon. I'm going to read a couple from you. Thank you. I love this one. Why do you think that humans are so happy to assign intelligence to a machine and not to nature? It's so true. Only recently have there been books, the mother tree, in the last only 10, 15 years are people saying that, oh, plants are actually intelligent. Look at photosynthesis. You take air and sunlight and make food. If that's not intelligence, I don't know what is. And yet we've never thought plants were intelligent, primarily because they don't have a brain, right? They don't have a brain, so they're not intelligent. And so animal intelligence, too. Jane Goodall was one of the early ones to say, like, these chimpanzees and primates, they use tools, they worry, they get mad, they plan, they solve problems, like, duh, but that was also, in the 60s or 70s. So Western science has been so slow to assign intelligence to anything else except humans, human exceptionalism. But now, yes, machines, they're intelligent. So I'm glad that over our lunch conversation, Kaimana and all of you are like, can we really compare ancestral intelligence with artificial intelligence? Because it's not intelligence. It's copying other information, maybe reproducing it in novel ways, maybe replicating it, maybe expanding on it with other data. But it's a hodgepodge, right? There's no ethical intelligent system managing it unless the designers or the algorithms do. So really fascinating. Great question. I'll want to read just a couple of more here to get some of your voices in the room. How can one, on a personal level, contribute to or give credit to ancestral intelligence? And can it be applied at a larger scale? I think that's really a big question that we have all kind of refuted, because Anishinaabe knowledge is different from Quetzal knowledge, from Yaqui knowledge, from Hawaiian knowledge. It's part of the problem even educating about Indigenous knowledge in institutions like Exploratorium or at universities, because it's so hard to generalize. We are each different nations, different languages. Maya, Yucatec Maya compared to other Maya languages. So I think at a larger scale, it's very challenging. And I think we should question that. I think Indigenous knowledge is always local knowledge. It's always local knowledge, yeah. And in our last time here, let's see. Recently, the Madri, that is Maori, sorry. Recently, the Maori have trained a large language model on their native languages. Have your communities explored doing something similar? I think you mentioned that. You may have more experience with that question. I've heard a lot of Native people excited about the use of AI for language revitalization, but I don't know any real specifics of it and how that can be used. We have recordings of our elders. Some are deceased, some are living. I would like to hear from Dan and Kaimana on that, and that'll be kind of our last response. How can we use AI to really support Indigenous language revitalization?
That was interesting because I keep thinking of this, Quitson bot, like this one thing where you can, feed this information, all the ethnographic information into this program or something and create a Quitson bot that will speak the language. And then you can use old recordings, right, now, and so they can mimic their voices and stuff like that. Stage that. I don't know. It's kind of crazy, but, but it's kind of a real fear because we have probably less than 100 fluent speakers left in our tribe, which is, a lot for a California tribe. But I think there's potentially some benefit in trying to figure out a way, as long as we could, keep the ownership and copyright and things like that for the community. I think that's probably the best thing, and that's the one thing that I fear, in some ways. But yeah.
Kaimana.
So for me, I think relative to language, if we can create a closed AI system where we utilize it to help practice perhaps dialogue or knowledge retention, not wisdom retention, knowledge retention, that could be helpful. Now, the reason I say a closed system is because, there's so much linguistic nuances. We only have one language, but we have a lot of different dialects. And I remember growing up often being scolded in our language, not being able to speak it. After going to learn how to speak it in university system, we had elders that would say, "Oh, that's University Hawaiian. That's University Hawaiian," and it was because it was sterile Hawaiian, right? It was sterile Hawaiian. They would often ask you things and listen to what your answer is, and they're not really asking you what you think they're asking you. They will ask you, "Oh, what you like to eat down from the beach? What are some of the stuff on the rocks that you like?" And if I were to respond, "Hauke uke," then "Oh, you must be from Big Island." "Hauewe," "Oh, that's a Maui dialect." "Haku ekue," "Oh, that's the island of Kauai." So, they weren't really asking, they didn't really care what I like to eat. They wanted to know where I was from. So they're asking these questions. And so they don't have those contextual nuances. And if we use AI and just feed them all of this, AI won't know all of this because we think differently. We understand things differently. But if we can create like a closed system that maybe we input and put robust guardrails around, okay, this is the Big Island dialect. And we're really good about sharing this Big Island dialect. That's awesome. I think that can be helpful. But again, e lula i ka enehana, we rule the technology. We set those guardrails, we set those parameters, and we create checks and balances. And we take honest look at it as we go down the line and know when to adjust, know when to get there. When we voyage, we know where the island is. We have a reference course line as how we're going to get there. It's never that reference course line. We adjust along the way. We make the necessary adjustments, and there's a lot of beauty in deviating from that course. Same with AI. If we're going to use that, we've got a reference, but we're going to have to keep the checks and balances to make sure that we're ruling it and it's not ruling us.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming. Let's thank the Exploratorium for their boldness and really looking at AI with fresh eyes and bringing in 4 Indigenous folks to talk about it. And so thank you, Isabel and Melissa and Sam and everyone for really welcoming us so warmly. We're just honored. Thank you to Dan, Rebecca, and Kaimana Chimigwich for your wisdom and for being here tonight. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
And mahalo to you, Melissa, for leading us in such delicious conversation. Aloha.